Hello. At the end of a long, busy day, welcome to Slow Night Ancient Tales, here to help you find peaceful rest. Tonight, the story I will be reading for you is a short story by author Kim Dong-in, titled When the Great Foundation Stone Breaks. A great foundation stone refers to the massive pillar that firmly supports a nation. Set in the final years of King Uija's reign, as the fate of the Baekje Kingdom was fading, this is the story of General Gyebaek. He became the last pillar of his declining nation, leading a death-defying army of 5,000 men into the vast plains of Hwangsan. Even in the desperate situation of hundreds of thousands of allied forces rushing in, and even in the face of inevitable death, we remember his noble and sorrowful loyal spirit that never broke. If there were heavy responsibilities and overwhelming worries pressing down on your shoulders today, I hope that, at least for this deep and tranquil night, you can let them all go, just as General Gyebaek finally laid down his heavy burdens. Please lean into the calm of my voice, find your most comfortable position, and gently close your eyes. Now let us begin tonight's story. Dong-in's Historical Tales Volume 2, When the Great Tree Falls, by Kim Dong-in. The late years of King Uija of Baekje. In the early days of his reign, King Uija was praised as remarkably wise. However, as the nation enjoyed peace and the people lived in comfort, the constraints on his heart naturally loosened, and he gradually fell into wine and women. As the king neglected the nation and sank deeper solely into indulgence, Songcheng, who held the high rank of Jwapyeong, earnestly admonished the king for his immorality. Ultimately, he incurred the king's wrath and was imprisoned, his loyal soul quietly fading away in the solitude of his cell. Facing death, General Songcheng summoned General Gyebaek to his prison cell. By the time Gyebek hurried to the cell, Songcheng had already departed for the world of eternal silence, unable to leave even a single word of request. Gyebek, having received Songcheng's unspoken final wish. The year was the 16th of King Uija's reign. The king was falling deeper into indulgence day by day. The nation's power was declining day by day. Watching this, anyone with a conscious heart could not help but worry. The memorial that Wapyeong Songcheng offered to the king as he faced death read, "There will inevitably be a war in the near future." Anyone with eyes to observe the times could see that war was bound to break out soon. Silla, entrenched to the east, had until now only been on the receiving end of Baekje's attacks. But now, not only was Silla's national strength solidified, but they had also formed a close alliance with the Tang dynasty. If war were to break out between Silla and Baekje, Tang would undoubtedly aid Silla. Furthermore, Silla harbored resentment from the constant humiliations they had suffered at the hands of Baekje over the years. The current rigorous training of their military in Silla must be a preparatory move to conquer Baekje. On top of this, a brilliant minister named Kim Uija had emerged in Silla, and a brilliant general named Su Dingfang had emerged in Tang. Baekje naturally had to be on guard against this. Nevertheless, the king spent his days solely in indulgence. The ministers focused only on flattering the king, and if anyone occasionally offered loyal admonishment, they could not escape a tragic end. Under these circumstances, how could the sovereignty of Baekje possibly be preserved? General Gyebaek, who inherited Songcheng's will, never again admonished the king after that. Admonishing would have no effect, and far from being effective, his own life would meaninglessly perish, just like Songcheng's. He refrained from ineffective admonishments and silently continued to do what he had to do. Because the king became so exceedingly debauched, there were moments when Gyebek, feeling thoroughly disgusted with the king, had fleeting thoughts of retiring to the countryside like the other ministers, plowing fields, playing with cranes, and spending the rest of his life in peace. However, upon further reflection, he realized that all the principal ministers in this court, disgusted by the king's debauchery, had already hidden themselves in the wilderness. The only ones remaining in the court were himself and a few others. If even he were to hide, who would defend the nation? Admonishing the king would fall on deaf ears, and not only would the king not listen, but Gyebek would not even be able to preserve his own life. While his single life might not be so extraordinary, if he were to disappear when there was no one else in this Baekje court, the 700-year dynasty would turn into nothing but a fleeting spring dream. Let me stay. Let me protect it. As long as my eyes remain open, I will endure and endure. General Gyebaek guarded the empty royal court alone every day, as if he were from a completely different world than the king, who was out of his mind with indulgence and the other ministers. Meanwhile, he did not neglect the training of his small number of troops, constantly worrying and preparing to face the national crisis whenever it might arise. In other words, the 700-year sovereignty of Baekje rested entirely upon General Gyebaek's two shoulders. In Baekje, which was gradually growing darker, bizarre events began to unfold. As the 700-year dynasty was collapsing, how could heaven not show signs in advance? In the 19th year of this king's reign, the 4th year of Xianqing, a massive red horse suddenly appeared out of nowhere and galloped around the Ohoisa temple 6 times every day. While the people were whispering about this strange anomaly, in February, packs of foxes entered the capital in droves. Not only that, but the foxes eventually entered the palace itself, and one white fox among them even climbed onto the Jwapyong's desk and played. In April, the hens in the crown prince's palace mated with sparrows. In May, a dead fish over 30 feet long washed up on the banks of the Sajasu, also known as the Sabi River. A few people ate it thinking it was just regular fish, and everyone who ate it perished entirely. Because such ominous events were occurring, the capital of Baekje, already gloomy, sank into an even darker and more dismal mood. Even when the people met each other, they avoided talking. If they did speak, they hurried away from each other as if they might be struck by lightning from a clear sky. Everyone said that a startling tragedy would happen in the near future. Amidst this bleakness, that summer passed, and in September, the sound of weeping from an unknown source echoed faintly within the palace day after day, and at night, ghostly wailing could be heard, giving everyone goosebumps. That year soon passed, and the following year arrived. Everyone, having sent off the past year in a bleak mood, quietly hoped that a brighter spirit might arise in the new year. But this hope was in vain, and as the new year began, even more ominous signs appeared day by day. In February of the new year, overnight, every single well in the capital turned to blood. This was an astonishingly evil omen. The people, whose hearts were already the size of peas and who had been trying to welcome a slightly brighter spring, all sealed their lips like corpses once again. Unable to endure their thirst after losing their drinking water, the people went out to the Saja River to seek water. But even the Saja River, which had always been as clear as crystal, had turned the color of blood. In April, tens of thousands of toads swept into the capital from nowhere, turning the whole city into a world of toads. On top of that, the citizens, gripped by some inexplicable obsession, ran about in terror in large crowds, fleeing this way and that, as if chased by someone. And in this baseless chaos, hundreds of people were trampled to death, and countless lost their property. In June, an even more bizarre incident occurred, witnessed unanimously by all the monks of Hwangsan Temple. Water came flooding all the way inside the gates of Hwangsan, its source unknown. Furthermore, a large ship floated in, only for both the water and the ship to suddenly vanish. A dog as large as a deer appeared from the west, reached the banks of the Saja River, and barked like fog towards the palace. Also, a ghost leaped into the palace, shouted loudly, "Baekje is falling! Baekje is falling!" and vanished into the earth. The king spent his days completely unaware of all the other evil omens and the gloomy mood of the people. Even if he heard such rumors, he would just laugh them off and call for more wine and women. However, the appearance of a ghost in the palace courtyard shouting that Baekje was falling was something that even a king steeped in debauchery could not easily ignore. The king immediately ordered his palace attendants to dig up the earth near where the ghost had vanished. Upon digging, about 3 feet deep, they found a single turtle. Here was nothing else. So, to present this turtle to the king, they washed it cleanly with water, and distinctly some characters appeared on the turtle's back. It read, "Baekje is like a full moon, and Silla is like a crescent moon." The king saw these words. He then had the royal astrologer divine its meaning. The divination, too, was unfavorable. A full moon means it is about to wane, and a crescent moon means it is about to become full. Baekje is like a full moon, so it will soon wane, and Silla is like a crescent moon, so it will soon become full. That is the divination. The king flew into a rage at this interpretation. No matter how deep he had fallen into debauchery, the words that Baekje would soon fall could not help but offend the king's ears. Consequently, that astrologer was immediately put to death. Another minister, who understood the king's psychology well, whispered tempting words into the king's ear. A full moon indicates prosperity, and a crescent moon indicates weakness. This means that Baekje is a great nation, and Silla is a small nation. For this, he received a great reward. Every time General Gyebaek saw and heard of these wicked and ominous events, his heart ached as if being torn apart. These were all clear evil omens. Without a doubt, they were precursors to the eventual demise of the nation of Baekje. Despite these warnings from heaven, the king still failed to awaken, and merely spent his time with wine and women. Meanwhile, the old general set up an altar in his back garden and prayed to the heavens every night. Vast and eternal heavens, please look down upon us. This sovereignty, continuously maintained for 700 years since King Uija, is now in peril. Please restore our king to the wise and brilliant ruler he once was. It is not too late. Please turn our king's heart. Shouldering the collapsing nation alone, he now sought to rely solely on the power of the divine. According to the rumors reaching him, Silla was entirely focused on training its troops day and night. He knew full well that this military training was aimed solely at Baekje. While they were building their strength in this way, his own country was plunged only in wine and women. What was to be done about this in the future? Given the nation's current strength and the various signs he had witnessed, it seemed Baekje was destined to fall anyway. However, refusing to fall without a fight, General Gyebaek secretly and tirelessly trained his soldiers without the king's knowledge. Songchung's prophecy and Gyebek's prediction were not wrong. Silla had been tirelessly training its soldiers to avenge the hundreds of years of humiliation they had suffered from Baekje, simultaneously biding their time for the right opportunity. Finally, seizing the moment when Baekje's political situation became extremely chaotic, they raised the army for the conquest of Baekje they had long prepared for. Even though Baekje's politics were in disarray and they supposedly lacked an army, Silla, having witnessed the astonishing valor of Baekje's soldiers in the past, knew they could not win with their nation's strength alone, and requested reinforcements from the Tang dynasty. An allied force of 130,000 ground and naval troops, led by Tang General Su Dingfang and the Silla army, advanced toward the Baekje border. When this shocking news burst into the Baekje royal court, which had been completely absorbed in indulgence, the king and his many ministers were thrown into panic and could not make head or tail of the situation. They consulted ministers like Jwapyong Wijik and Dalsol Sangyong on how to overcome this national crisis, but no good strategies could come from those who had failed to look after the nation's affairs all this time. Ultimately, the king was forced to entrust this heavy responsibility of overcoming the national crisis to General Gyebaek. Since Jwapyong Songchong died in prison, the old general, who had shouldered Baekje's chaotic politics alone, working silently for the country without receiving a single glance from the king, was finally summoned before the throne in this time of national crisis. Looking up, he saw the royal face, pale from a long period of indulgence. He had occasionally seen him from a distance, but seeing this pale face up close, tears naturally flowed from the old general's eyes first. "General, the allied forces of Silla and Tang are invading our borders. Your subject has long known that this day would come. If you knew, why did you not speak of it sooner? I believe Jwapyong Songcheng petitioned your majesty regarding this when he was alive." These words, spoken with a grief-stricken face, pierced the king's heart deeply. After a moment, General Gyebek continued, "Your Majesty, there is something your subject wishes to present for your royal inspection. Would you please make a brief journey?" To the king, this was a somewhat bothersome request, but finding himself in a position where he had to view this general as the sole savior of the national crisis, he had no choice but to follow Gyebek's words. The place General Gyebaek led the king to was Gyebek's own military camp. He had brought the king to this camp, which he had established, maintained, and trained with his own solitary strength, knowing a national crisis like today would come. At a single command from General Gyebaek, the soldiers lined up in the wide courtyard. The general on horseback and the king in his carriage pointed at them. "Your Majesty, for the crime of arbitrarily establishing and maintaining this military force, and for secretly raising a private army away from the king, I deserve to die 10,000 times. However, if this fortunate preparation can be even a fraction of a help in overcoming today's national crisis, your subject will have no greater joy." The aligned soldiers. The king, who had assumed there wasn't a single soldier left because he had been steeped only in wine and women and neglected the country, could not help but shed tears at this old general's far-sightedness. The king, once wise and valiant himself, could easily gauge how elite and formidable these troops were just by looking at the soldiers lined up in the courtyard. "General, how many are there?" 5,000. My strength was insufficient, and this is all I could muster." "Ah, General, forgive me. I am ashamed. A single one of your soldiers could easily match 10 from the Silla and Tang allied forces. The sovereignty of Baekje is like a solid rock thanks to your virtue." "No, your Majesty. I am confident that one of these soldiers can easily match not just 10, but 20 of the Silla and Tang allied forces. However, the allied forces consist of 130,000 Tang troops alone, totaling 300,000 for both Silla and Tang. If one man cannot withstand 60, there is no other way but annihilation. Your Majesty, if you had earlier heeded the advice of Juapyong Songcheng and defended the land route so the enemy could not cross Tanhyeon, and the water route so they could not cross the Baekgang River, these 5,000 men would not fear even 500,000 Silla and Tang troops. But now that we have already lost Tanyan to the enemy, and they have advanced to the broad plains of Hwangsan, I fear there is nothing we can do." "Even so, no, your Majesty. Even if all 300,000 of the enemy die in battle, there are 5 million Tang troops and 500,000 Silla troops to replenish them from behind. But for our country, if these 5,000 are lost, there is nothing behind us. Furthermore, we have already lost Tanyan, a choke point where one man can hold off 10,000, and since the battle will likely take place on an open plain, I fear the 700-year dynasty has nowhere to be saved." General Gyebaek spoke with tears flowing from his old eyes. The king stood silently before him. Having bid farewell to the king and returned to his home, General Gyebaek first released all the servants in the household and sent them away. Then he called his wife and children before him. He gazed silently for a long while at his family sitting side by side before him, and finally opened his mouth. "I have something I want to ask you. Yes, please speak." "Very well. Will you become the drifting subjects of a ruined nation, or will you become the ghosts of a great nation?" Receiving this question, his wife and children looked up at the general. Knowing the situation, they fully understood the gravity of these extraordinary words coming from the general's lips in this time of national crisis. Born as humans, how could we become the drifting subjects of a ruined nation? Even if we become ghosts, we will remain the people of a great nation to the end. That is right. A person is born into this world and can only die once. In return, they must inevitably die that one time. If one fails to die when it is time to die, they suffer a disgrace worse than death. You all understand this well. Yes, we understand. Then, all of you, kneel there. After they all knelt according to his command, the general quietly stood up, once, twice, 3 times. Every time the general's sword was raised, a head fell at his feet. A few severed heads rolled aside, a few headless bodies collapsed separately, and blood flowed between them. He had merely cut off a few unresisting heads, but after doing this effortless task, the general stood blankly, leaning on his sword, as exhausted as if he had just fought a massive war. He stood there seemingly out of his mind for half the day before finally gathering his senses and entering the palace. Night had already fallen, but in this time of national crisis, the king had no choice but to receive the general readily. The king was startled by the blood-covered general's pale face. "Your Majesty, it is the blood of your subjects' wife and children. I feared that if my family remained behind, the tip of my sword might become blunt. so I eliminated them in advance. I have now come before the throne to bid my final farewell. If we do not march out to meet the surging enemy troops tonight, I fear they will reach the capital gates by dawn, so I plan to depart this very night. This night. Yes, it seems we cannot delay even for a moment. Bidding a hasty farewell to the king in this manner, the general led his death-defying army of 5,000 and marched off to Hwangsan. In ancient times, Gujian of Yue defeated the 700,000-strong army of Wu with a mere 5,000 soldiers. Today, the Silla Tang allied forces are only 130,000, and we, like Gujian's army, are 5,000. Although the allied forces outnumber us by dozens of times, they are a disorganized rabble, so if we face them with our elites, there is nothing to fear. When he drew his general's sword high and commanded his troops, the 5,000 Suicide Squad members raised their swords together and swore to fight to the death. It was a terrifying war. Raised in anticipation of a future national crisis, the Baekje soldiers fought like demons. The Silla army under the command of General Kim Uija, known as the God of War, and the Tang army commanded by Su Dingfang initially underestimated this small force. Then they attacked with caution and finally attacked with all their might, using every tactic they had, but to no avail. There were 4 major pitched battles. In all 4 battles, the vastly outnumbered Baekje soldiers struck down the cloud-like Silla Tang allied forces and emerged victorious. Usin's army tried to divide into 3 paths to surround and annihilate the Baekje forces, but instead, it was the Silla army that nearly faced annihilation. Thus, contrary to initial expectations, the situation became unpredictable. Because of this, the morale of the Baekje army soared ever higher, while the spirit of the Silla Tang forces began to die down. In the Silla Che, MP, anxiety gradually grew. When they first arrived, they believed they would crush Baekje in a single battle. But having come to this point, General Gyebaek's 5,000 Baekje soldiers were like fierce demons. Silla could do nothing without annihilating them first, and on top of that, their own troops lacked the courage to defy death. At this rate, their massive army of hundreds of thousands was likely to suffer a miserable defeat at the hands of a mere 5,000 Baekje soldiers and be forced to return home. Their soldiers lacked the courage to not fear death. Unless they could somehow instill this courage, they would never win. Thus, General Kim Uija, after consulting with his younger brother, General Hwangsan, sent Hwangsan's son, a young boy named Bangul, to charge alone into the Baekje camp. Into the Baekje camp, which even Silla's hundreds of thousands of troops could not match, a single boy charged in, amounting to nothing. The moment he charged in, he died on the tip of a Baekje soldier's sword. However, General Uija saw it. The young boy Bangul's death was by no means a death in vain. When they saw the young boy Bangul charge into the Baekje camp alone and die, an indescribable agitation arose among the Silla troops. There was a clear reaction. The hearts of the soldiers had been stirred. Seeing the sprouts of hope in this first test, General Kim Uija sent another young boy named Gwanchang, alone once again, into the Baekje camp. Meanwhile, the Baekje general, who had fought 4 times and unexpectedly won all 4, summoned a captured Silla commander. And when they removed his armor and helmet, surprisingly, it was a boy of 15 or 16. They said another boy who charged in earlier had also been killed. "What is your name?" the general asked in a gentle tone, thinking of his own children who had died by his sword. At this, the boy instead glared and shouted, "I am a Silla commander, and you are a Baekje commander. Commanders are equal, so speak to me with some respect." The boy's bold words sounded admirable to the general. Based on what he had seen so far, he thought all Silla soldiers were cowards, but here was a brave boy. General Gyebaek ordered his lieutenant to return this boy safely to the Silla camp. Even as he sent him back, reminded of his own children who had washed and offered their necks to his sword in his home days ago, he stepped outside the camp, placed his hand on his forehead, and watched the boy's receding figure until it was far out of sight. However, not even a quarter of an hour had passed before the boy charged into the Baekje camp yet again. The Baekje officers and men tried hard to capture him alive, but the boy resisted so stubbornly that they had no choice but to kill him. When the boy they had spared and sent back earlier was laid before General Gyebaek as a corpse, the general, deeply pitying the boy's bold and righteous action, tied the boy's head to the tail of the horse the boy had ridden and whipped the horse, sending it back towards the Silla camp. General Gyebaek, who was briefly resting after returning the boy's corpse to the Silla camp, came out upon hearing a commotion in his own camp. The general looked and was startled. The Silla camp, visible across the way, was in turmoil. It was no ordinary turmoil. It was the agitation of stirred military hearts. Even from here, he could see that the Silla camp, which had been as calm as oil until now, was covered with a spirit that seemed to pierce the sky. To the eyes of General Gyebaek, who had spent a long life as a military commander, that turmoil was astonishing. Instantly, General Gyebaek realized he had fallen into Kim Usin's trap. Because their soldiers' morale was too dull, Usin had sent young commanders to their deaths to stir up their hearts, and Gyebek, falling for that scheme, had ultimately killed the boy. If he had known it was a scheme, he would never have killed the boy. Even at the sacrifice of hundreds of Baekje soldiers, he would have captured him and sent him back again. Now, looking at the aura covering the Silla army, General Gyebaek saw the spirit of the Silla troops. And now that the Silla army's spirit was this stirred up, the previous ratios were unimaginable. If their spirits were matched, their combat power would be 1-to-1. Watching the massive Silla army surging forward like an angry wave, tears rained down from the old general's eyes even as he reorganized his camp. Die, do not hope to live. To return alive is a disgrace to a person of Baekje. Beneath the roaring general, the soldiers swore to die. Thus, the final decisive battle began on the plains of Hwangsan. The strength of the Silla army, driven by stirred hearts, was not the Silla army of before. The 5,000 Baekje soldiers, who had lost fewer than 100 men in the previous 4 battles, were this time completely annihilated, leaving not a single man standing. General Gyebaek, too, finally became the dew of the battlefield. After the battle, the Silla army discovered General Gyebaek's corpse. When they removed his armor and helmet, there were countless wounds from spears and swords, more than 30, covering his body. Even the Silla general, Kim Usin, shed tears of emotion upon seeing the corpses of General Gyebek and his 5,000 Baekje soldiers, who had fought unyieldingly until their last breaths. The heroic final moments of General Gyebek and the 5,000 Baekje soldiers, who fought unyieldingly until their last breaths, leave a deep resonance in our hearts tonight. The fierce traces of those who sacrificed everything for their country in the massive vortex of history have now become a quiet tale of the past, remaining by our side. Your day today must have been as fierce and precious as any history. Leave behind all the moments you struggled through and now comfort yourselves, and I hope you fall into the most peaceful and deep sleep. That concludes the old tale I have prepared for tonight. If this story helped bring you a peaceful night, please subscribe, like, and turn on notifications, and I will return next night with another story to soothe your heart. You have worked hard today as well. Good night.